Alright guys, so tonight we are not in class because of the potential snow that we're supposed to have, so it's kind of throwing everybody off, but as you know, we are really behind when it comes to, we're not really behind, but just a little bit behind as far as covering the chemistry aspect of Chapter 2, or finishing up Chapter 2 so you guys can complete the quiz for Wednesday. And also, we were supposed to start cells tonight. So I wanted to at least finish the chemistry. We'll see how this goes and how much I can cover. And I'm not going to spend more than what you would have spent in class as far as time for me talking. So we'll see how this video lecture goes. If you have questions, what I'd like for you to do is either A, you can put them in the comment section and I can answer them that way, or you can email me and I can answer them in maybe another video. So, or just save it for class. So what we're going to do is, I've kind of pulled up the, PowerPoint here, and I'm going to pick up at the chemical bonds because we were kind of speeding through this, and I want to make sure that I really cover the chemical bond section. Now, I'm going to write on these PowerPoints because obviously I need to have a way to communicate with you guys, but I cannot save this and send it to you. So you will need to write down whatever I'm writing down or it doesn't get saved. So some of this we've already talked about, so I'm going to be able to kind of move through it relatively quickly. So if you remember last time, we talked about covalent bonding and ionic bonding. And we watched a few videos, I do believe. So we introduced the idea of this electron shell. So here's the electron shell here. And so this would be one electron shell, and then the second ring is the second electron shell. One thing I did not mention, your first electron shell holds 2 electrons. So this pen is not working for me. Pen, all right. The first shell holds 2 electrons, and the second shell holds 8 electrons. Now, we really don't go up in this class much more than that. You'll see a couple, but for the most part, this is the idea. So this first ring holds a maximum of 2 electrons. So there's 1, 2. And then this one here, the second ring can hold 8. Now, this one's only holding 1, 2, 3, 4. So this particular atom is carbon. All right, so what they've done here again is, they showed the atomic structures for these. And we've already reviewed all of these, so I'm just going to kind of go through it. And as you recall, I said when you have the electrons in the outer ring are called the valence shell electrons. So when we had that carbon earlier, and we had 2 electrons, and then here's my second ring, and it had 1, 2, 3, 4, so that carbon. Carbon's got 4 electrons on the outer ring, so it's got 4 valence electrons. So that's carbon. Carbon has 4 valence electrons. And however, carbon wants 8 valence electrons, right? So it's gonna have to bond with other atoms to get those 8 valence electrons. All right, so these interactions, oh, my slide moved too fast. Those interactions are called chemical bonds, and those are basically going to interactions that usually result in atoms staying close together. So we're going to look at the different types of chemical bonds. We talked about covalent bonds. These are two atoms with an unpaired electron in the outer shell, and they share electrons, remember? So they're supposed to share. That is really, 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 really important, that they share a pair of electrons. Two or more atoms held together is by covalent bonds is called a molecule. A covalent bond connects two hydrogen atoms in the molecule of hydrogen gas. This would be a molecule of hydrogen gas. And then you have the little video.
A covalent bond is the sharing of a pair of outer shell electrons by two atoms. For example, each of these hydrogen atoms has one electron in its outer shell, but needs two electrons to complete its outer shell. If the two hydrogen atoms share electrons, they can both complete their outer shells. The shared pair of electrons constitutes a covalent bond, shown in shorthand as a line. The covalently bonded hydrogen atoms form a molecule of hydrogen gas. A molecule is defined as two or more atoms held together by covalent bonds. An oxygen atom needs two electrons to complete its outer shell. Two oxygen atoms can share two pairs of electrons. A molecule of oxygen gas is held together by a double covalent bond, two shared pairs of electrons. A carbon atom needs four electrons to complete its outer shell. It can share electrons with four hydrogen atoms, forming a methane molecule containing four single covalent bonds. Methane is a compound, a substance formed by the combination of two or more elements. We call methane natural gas. It is the fuel burned in gas stoves and furnaces. An oxygen atom needs two additional electrons to fill its outer shell. Thus, it can form two single covalent bonds. An oxygen atom can share electrons with two hydrogen atoms, forming a molecule of water containing two single covalent bonds.
So we talked about the different types of bonding. You have single bonds, double bonds, and triple bonds. So we said that single bonds would be just one line, and they would shares two electrons. A double bond shares four electrons, and then of course the triple bond is going to share six. And this shares six electrons. All right, and then here is just some common molecular formulas, and then how that they are distributing electrons. I really like this a lot, this electron distribution diagram, because it kind of shows you, remember, one of these electrons right here goes with the hydrogen, and this electron here goes with this hydrogen. Now, when you're looking at here, so it's showing that these hydrogens are sharing, this pair of electrons. Here we have, remember, this one here, they're sharing four electrons in this, because each one of these have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So by sharing the 4, it makes 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for that one, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for this one. So by sharing the 4, each of these will have 8. Now, if you're looking at this methane, You have the carbon in the middle. Remember, one of these electrons, I'm just going to color one. One of these electrons belongs to carbon. The other one is going to be hydrogen's electron, but they're sharing them so that carbon will have 8 electrons in its outer ring and hydrogen will have 2. Now the last example here is water. And now water really doesn't do what this, it really doesn't distribute the way it's shown here, because we talked about that a little bit last class. We see that oxygen has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons on its outer ring, and it's sharing, or it's supposed to share this one and this one with hydrogen. However, remember, oxygen is extremely electronegative, so it doesn't share well. And so there's a slide coming up that will show that electronegativity. But because it's not sharing well, I'm going to write here, oxygen doesn't share well, and it's going to forms polar bond. And that's why it's called polar covalent bond, because it's not sharing like it's supposed to. All right, and so this is just them showing the pictures a lot bigger, so I'm just going to kind of skip through. All right, now this slide here says covalent bonds join atoms into molecules through electron sharing. So again, covalent bond, the take-home message here, anytime you see the word sharing, instantly start thinking about covalent bonds. Covalent bonds, electron sharing. H2 and O2 are molecules composed of only one element. And that for this particular one, hydrogen is the only element, and for this one, oxygen. Methane and water are compounds, substances composed of 2 or more different elements. So that's important. All right, atoms in a covalently bonded molecule continuously compete for shared electrons. The attraction or pulled, or the pulling of electrons is called electronegativity. And so I'm going to draw my little corny periodic table again here. So here's my little periodic table. And if you just kind of, have a general idea, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine. Completely ignore the noble gases that are typically down here, because remember, they're noble gases, they're inert gases, so they will not react for us. So they're not going to be reacting. Electronegativity increases as you go over the table and up the table. Here, fluorine is your most electronegative atom on the periodic table. So fluorine equals most electronegative atom on the periodic table. All right. Now, nitrogen and oxygen are also extremely electronegative, so they don't share well, okay? So these guys do not share well with others. So please keep that in mind when you're looking at how these guys react. Here, think about oxygen, what we just said about oxygen earlier with water. Remember, we said oxygen doesn't share well with the hydrogen atoms in water, therefore it makes it polar. So that's the whole idea, and we're going to look at that again in just a second. All right, in molecules of only one element, the pull towards each atom is equal because each atom has the same electronegativity. So if you're looking at, let's take a look here at, let's say, hydrogen gas. I just feel like that's not coming through. All right, so this is hydrogen gas. Both hydrogens are going to be able to pull equally on this pair of shared electrons here. It's like playing tug of war with yourself. So it's an equal pulling. So anytime it's equal pulling, it's called nonpolar covalent. if you had something like methane. Here's our methane. All of these hydrogens can pull the same strength, so this is also considered a nonpolar covalent bonds. So these are all equal. So imagine if you had, just imagine it as being tug of war. How strong are they? And we know how strong they are based on where they're located out on the periodic table. Now, water has atoms with different electronegativities. Oxygen is more electronegative. So remember, so oxygen is more electronegative than hydrogen. Hydrogen is not electronegative. So even though oxygen is supposed to be sharing its electrons, it really doesn't. It doesn't share well. So it hogs the electrons, and oxygen becomes slightly negatively charged. And hydrogen loses its electrons. Remember, anytime you lose something that's negatively charged, you become positive. And that makes a polar covalent bond. And if I were to draw, so I'm going to draw here. So again, here's your oxygen with your hydrogen. Oxygen is pulling these electrons, so it becomes partially negative charged, and this becomes holds that partial positive. So when they say slightly negative, oftentimes they write it like that, and then the slightly positive gets written like this, slightly positive. Now here's something, a new word, ion. So ion. Just to kind of give you an example, that's an ion, sodium ion. Anytime you see something written with a charge, that's an ion. So an ion is an atom or molecule with an electrical charge resulting from the loss or gain of one or more electrons. When an electron is lost, a positive charge results. So this would be Na, and this would be lost one electron. We can give this another name when it's a positively charged ion. So positive charged ion. We call those cation ions. All right. When an electron is gained, a negative charge results. So, for instance, F minus gained one electron, and a negatively charged ion is called anion. So two ions with opposite charges attract each other. When that happens, that forms an ionic bond. So, for example, and it's going to be on the next page as well, sodium ion and a chloride ion will bind together and they will make sodium chloride. This is ionic. This is the cation, and this is called an anion because it's negatively charged. Salt is a synonym for ionic compounds. So most often ionic compounds are salts. And here's another video. We're going to watch this really quickly.
Sometimes atoms complete their outer shells by stealing or giving away electrons. This happens between sodium and chlorine atoms. An electron moves from the sodium atom to the chlorine atom. The outer shells of both atoms are now complete, containing 8 electrons. The chlorine atom now has 18 electrons, but only 17 protons. Because an electron has a negative charge, the chlorine atom now has a net negative charge. Such a charged atom or molecule is called an ion, in this case, a negative ion. The sodium atom has lost an electron, leaving it with an extra proton, which has a positive charge. The sodium atom has become a positive ion. Ions with opposite charges are attracted to each other, forming an ionic bond. These ions combine to form a compound with new properties. In this case, sodium chloride, ordinary table salt, is formed.
Okay, so if you look here, remember, just take a second and think about what's actually going on here. Remember, when you're looking at these atoms, think about what their end game is. Why would this sodium just give its electron away? Well, let's take a look. What's the rule? Remember, we said they want 8 valence electrons in their outer ring. So imagine if sodium gives this electron over to chlorine, this outer ring is now gone. This whole outer ring will be gone. And then what's left? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 electrons in that inner ring. Do you see that? So by doing that, I'm going to write it in here again. So by doing that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. By sodium giving away, so we can no one even cares about this outer ring anymore because sodium is happy to give that electron away and then leave. So it becomes Na+, it's lost an electron. It's happy to just give that electron to chlorine because chlorine would be thrilled to have it. Once chlorine gets it, and this is filled, chlorine now has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yay! So chlorine atom is completely happy. So chlorine gained 1 electron. The name of this ionic bond comes from the fact that you're bonding together ions. When one atom loses or gains electrons, these are called ions, and therefore this results in an ionic bond between the two of them. One will lose electron and the other one will gain. So there you go. See, we lost that whole outer ring, and now sodium's happy. It's got the 8 outside electrons, and chlorine is also happy. But sodium is now positively charged because it's got 1 less electron. Remember, electrons are negatively charged, so you're losing something that's negatively charged. If you lose something that's negative, you end up having more positive. So here's an example here of the sodium chloride salt. All right, hydrogen bonding. Now, hydrogen bonding, don't make this harder than it is. Hydrogen bonds are very weak bonds, but you can have strength in numbers here. You can only have hydrogen bonds whenever you're bonding with nitrogen, oxygen, and fluorine, okay? Any other time, it's not hydrogen bonding, okay? So if you have this is not hydrogen bonding. It is only called hydrogen bonding when it's bonded with nitrogen, oxygen, and fluorine. The reason you have that hydrogen bonding is because these guys are electronegative, which will make the hydrogen that they bond to slightly positive. So let's take a look at this, HF. When this happens, you guys know, we've said before, that fluorine is extremely electronegative. So it's going to pull and make that dipole here, and it's going to make this guy partially positive. This partial positive is what results in is what's essentially responsible for hydrogen bonding. We see hydrogen bonding a lot in biology. Now, I will tell you this, for a biology class, we almost never discuss fluorine because it's biology. If you take chemistry, you will discuss hydrogen bonding with fluorine a lot. But for the sake of biology class, we really just study the nitrogen and oxygen when it comes to hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonding, these are very weak bonds, but there tends to be millions of hydrogen bonds. So you end up getting these weak forces but strength in numbers. So there's so many of them, it makes them strong by default. So just to kind of give you, let's see what else the PowerPoint has. So let's see here. I want to say something else about hydrogen bonds. When it comes to hydrogen bonds, you're going to see hydrogen bonds. We're going to talk about it. DNA is double-stranded. The two strands of DNA are held together by hydrogen bonds. So that's another time we're going to talk about hydrogen bonding. We talked about, I'm going to get a blank, see if I can add in a slide here. Actually, I may be able to draw it down here. If you think about water, and I want you to kind of grasp, I think if I draw this, it'll make a little bit of sense. So I want you to think about water. I'm going to draw a lot of little water molecules. So there's my O2. And remember, this is going to make that partial negative, and these guys are partial positive. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and make another slide. So let me get out of this and put up another slide so that it makes sense. I'm going to add a slide. New slide. Okay, and then just that way it gives me a blank slide. All right, so I'm going to write on here, and I'm just going to kind of draw you a picture. I want to make sure hydrogen bonding makes sense to you. And water is the best molecule to think about when you think about hydrogen bonding because there's millions of hydrogen bonds. So if you think about it, so here's my oxygen with my hydrogen. Now remember, this is slightly negative and this is slightly positive here. Now, water isn't made up of just one single molecule of water here. There's millions. So here's another water molecule, right? The same thing applies. This is partial positive, this is partial negative, partial negative, and here's the partial positive. Here's the partial positive. And I'm going to draw a bunch of them, and then I'm going to go in and add in my hydrogen bonds. Again, slightly positive, slightly negative, slightly positive, and so let me just jot down all of these, and then I'll come back and add my 2 cents in after I finish drawing all the diagrams I want to draw. I've stopped labeling at this point the partial positive and partial negatives, but just know that they are there. All right, so this is going to be my last one. We'll draw one over here. Okay, now let me change my pen color because I want to show you something. Let's go with green. So I'm going to draw in everywhere that there's a partial, what we know about science, and you've probably known this since you were a kid. Negative and positive attracts. So you get a weak attraction right here, right? And then there's a weak attraction here because this is that partial negative and this is that partial positive. Here, there's a weak attraction. There's partial positive, and then this is partial negative. Everywhere there's that partial negative, everywhere that you're seeing this is supposed to be. No, I lost it. No. Oh, my whole molecule's gone. Okay, so I'm just going to draw one since I lost it. That stinks. I wish it would have saved. For the sake of just drawing it back, I'm not going to draw the whole thing back, but I'll just draw one. Ah, I'm doing it again. Sorry, guys. Still haven't quite mastered. Here we go. Look at this. My drawing is beaten by this lovely diagram here. Now, in my drawing, if you were to kind of go back in the video, what I was drawing in green, I may be able to kind of highlight it in green just to make it the same as what I was drawing before. This is that bond. So this is hydrogen bonding here. And you can have hydrogen bonding. I could put in another oxygen. Here's another bond, hydrogen bond. So anywhere you're just going to bond a loose hydrogen with an oxygen. All right, this is how water molecules are held together, by all those millions of hydrogen bonds. So all of these, this is a water molecule, this is a water molecule, this is a water molecule. So all these are water molecules. And they're held together by these hydrogen bonds here. There's millions of hydrogen bonds. Again, strength in numbers. So we're going to go ahead and watch this, and maybe this will, help.
The atoms that make up a water molecule are in a constant tug-of-war over their shared electrons. Oxygen exerts a far stronger pull on the shared electrons than does hydrogen, and so the electrons spend more of their time closer to the oxygen atom. Because of this unequal sharing of electrons, the oxygen atom in a water molecule actually has a slight negative charge, and each hydrogen atom has a slight positive charge, even though the water molecule as a whole is neutral. Because of the unequal sharing of electrons and the resulting positive and negative poles, a water molecule is said to be polar. The polarity of water molecules causes them to be attracted to each other. Since the positively charged atom involved in this special type of attraction is always a hydrogen atom, this kind of bond between molecules is called a hydrogen bond. Each water molecule can hydrogen bond to 4 other water molecules. A hydrogen bond is weak and lasts only a tiny fraction of a second, but it takes a lot of energy to overcome the combined attraction of many hydrogen bonds. This explains water's great capacity to store heat, its high boiling point, surface tension, and several other unusual properties.
All right, we're going to go into properties of water in just a second. It sounds kind of pointless. I'm sure you're probably thinking, I know about water. But there are certain characteristics, especially this polarity idea, that makes water extremely efficient as far as, our body's made up of mostly water. And that helps, prevent, helps us regulate our body temperature. If you think about it, anytime you've ever gotten a really high fever, the one thing the doctor tells you is to hydrate. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. That's because the water will resist temperature change. You don't want a fever of 105, 106 degrees. You want to keep your temperature at 98.6 degrees. So the water helps resist that drastic temperature change. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about water. Now, I'm going to stray away for just a second. I'm going to close out the PowerPoint. One of your classmates was working on the homework for this particular section and sent me a question, so I want to make sure I address this question. So I'm going to close out just a second, and we'll come back to it. Here's the question that was sent to me. Now, you may or may not have done this homework assignment yet, and if you haven't, then you get a free one. Here it is. Now, the question says, Part C, how many atoms in the pictured molecule can form hydrogen bonds with water molecules? Now, think about it for just a second. I'm going to, if you think, hopefully you can see my pointer. This will be very bad if you can't see my pointer, so hopefully you can. So remember, hydrogen bonding is only with nitrogen and oxygen. These carbon molecules are not going to hydrogen bond. They're not going to hydrogen bond. There is no charge. These guys aren't charged, remember? So what's going to happen is you can have a hydrogen bond with this hydrogen right here because it's going to be slightly positive. This one's going to be slightly positive. This nitrogen's going to form a slightly negative charge because of that hydrogen bonding. This oxygen over here is going to form a slightly negative charge, so it can also hydrogen bond with a water molecule. And this is going to form a slightly positive charge, which also can make it hydrogen bond. So again, let's read the question. How many atoms in the pictured molecule can form hydrogen bonds with water molecules? So let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the answer is 5 here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this molecule. Let me see if I can close this out or make it smaller. And let's see, hopefully it's not evil to me again like it was a second ago. And we're going to insert a new slide. What I want to do is put this in presentation mode, and I'm going to try to remember this molecule. That way you can take a look at it with me. we had a nitrogen here, right, with two hydrogens. We had a carbon with two hydrogens. And I'm just kind of drawing these hydrogens on here. And I believe there was an oxygen with one hydrogen. Now, what I want you to think about is that we know for sure that these guys are not hydrogen bonding. So we're going to completely ignore them. Now, this guy here is going to form a slightly negative charge, and this one's going to slightly positive and slightly positive. And this one's going to be slightly negative and slightly positive. Remember, nitrogen, oxygen, and fluorine, hydrogen bond. Because they're there's an R in there, electronegative. Because electronegativity. All right. So I can essentially do bond water here and make a, you can bond water here. I can put a water here. I can put a water here. And I can put a water here. So I'm going to go back in. Hopefully it does not mess up. All these green bonds are hydrogen bonds. And there we are. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 atoms in that molecule can hydrogen bond. So hopefully that makes sense. Just if you need to, take a second and really look at, what could happen for these particular ones. So 5 atoms can hydrogen bond in that particular question. So hopefully that answers the question. All right. All right, so this chemical reactions make and break chemical bonds. Remember that structures of atoms and molecules determine the way they behave. Atoms combine to form molecules. Hydrogen and oxygen can react to form water. So when you're putting together hydrogen and oxygen, this is just a chemical reaction. So hydrogen and oxygen together make 2 molecules of water. Now, what I want you to realize, and I'm going to write this on here, we'll talk about it again later at some point, but this side of the table is reactants, and this side is your product side. So here you're going to have, you basically have 2 H2 molecules. So ultimately you have, here to draw it out, you have 4 of the hydrogens. So you have 4 hydrogens on this side, and now you have 4 on this side. Now this 2 also accounts for this oxygen. On this side over here you have 2 oxygens, and then over here you have 2 oxygens. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. So if you have 4 hydrogens on one side, you have to have 4 hydrogens on the other side. So that's just, how it is. All right, so reactants and products, there's those definitions there, and then that's ultimately showing you chemical reaction. Again, chemical reactions do not create or destroy matter. Chemical reactions only rearrange matter. So again, if we go back, this is just a different orientation. We can put these 2 together to make 1 molecule of water. And this is showing you again 2 hydrogen molecules with the oxygen, and then you're putting together and you're making 2 water molecules. We will talk lavishly in later chapters about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis is the chemical reaction that is essential for life on Earth. Remember, it is thought that, oxygen comes from plants. So hopefully you know that. So without our trees, let's start that again. So obviously you guys can tell I'm not a veteran at doing these videos. I'm Still trying to learn how to do them, so hopefully you guys can tolerate me in this little amount of time. So CO2, not CO2, that's not what I wanted. Oxygen comes from plants, all right? So without plants, we can't breathe. We need them to make oxygen for us via photosynthesis, okay? So if you think back to the beginning of time, and this is a billion years ago, before we were on this planet, there was no oxygen on the planet Earth. The primitive planet Earth did not have oxygen. They believe that photosynthesis, due to photosynthetic organisms like bacteria, going through photosynthesis to make their own food, was able to make the first signs of oxygen, which is very interesting. Photosynthesis recycles the carbon dioxide that we breathe out. So we breathe out carbon dioxide, and the plants are able to take it in with water and sunlight and produce glucose and oxygen. Remember, glucose is the food for the plant. All right, so these are things that are, so you think about it, if we put this in the form, and they probably have it, they don't. So, oops, let's go back again. I'm going to write something here. And that pen color was annoying me, so I'm going to change it to red. So if we think about it, what does the plant need? Plant needs carbon dioxide from us. And I'm going to say us. It also needs water. Now, not completely, I don't want to say completely us, because in the grand scheme of things, the plant makes carbon dioxide as well, because it breaks down its own food. So it is making its own carbon dioxide, but it does get a lot of carbon dioxide from us. Plus, it needs sunlight to produce glucose and oxygen. All right, so this would be the reactants, and this here is the products. All right. All right, so water. Here, the last little section, or last little bit of this is, and I think there's not much more. Let's take a look and see if I'm telling a fib or not. Ooh, there is quite a bit, but a lot of this at the end, so you guys are kind of seeing my PowerPoint as I'm pulling it up here. A lot of this towards the end is going to be review stuff. So starting at about somewhere here, about slide 99, then that's all review. We may not cover all of this PowerPoint and extend a lot of detail. All right, so water properties. So in this last section or so, we're going to discuss the properties of water. And a lot of them you guys are already familiar with, you just don't realize that you know about the properties of water. All right, cohesion and adhesion. These are things that we will definitely be able to look at in lab, and we've already looked at it in lab. Remember when I talked about that meniscus in the lab, and I drew that beautiful graduated cylinder on the board? Let's take a look. I'm going to draw it real quick. So here's my graduated cylinder. And I drew the meniscus. You're looking at adhesion right here. Okay? Adhesion is a tendency of two kinds of molecules to stick together. Water is sticking to the plastic of that graduated cylinder. So that is adhesion. When water sticks to water, that's cohesion, okay? So cohesion is much stronger for water than other liquids. So strong for liquid. Now here's the thing, it could be a little bit confusing. Water is the universal solvent. So most things are made up of water. So you're probably thinking, well, duh, you know, I could put any liquid in this graduated cylinder and it's going to make that meniscus. You know why it's going to make that meniscus? Because what you've dissolved it in is water. So it's essentially a water-based liquid. So that's why it's forming that meniscus. So cohesion is much stronger for water than other liquids. Plants depend upon cohesion to help transport water and nutrients from its roots to its leaves. So if you think about, here's a tree. plants or trees don't have a cardiovascular system to pump water up. So there's no heart or anything like that to pump water. So what happens is you have to water. So here's our roots down here, and you have all these roots, right, in the tree. Those are horrible looking roots. But the water is absorbed in through the soil, and then it's got to go up the tree. Here's the problem. It's going against gravity, okay? So it's using cohesion, water and water sticking together, and it uses adhesion for that water to move up the tree. Now, there are some valves in here that help push the water up, and then it's like there's valves within the tree. They kind of close off, so once the water goes past this valve, it closes up, and then there's another valve, and it closes up, and water will go up some more, and then there's another valve, and water goes up, and there's another valve. And it's like doors that close behind the water. This is what allows the water to migrate up the tree against gravity. Also, evaporation. As it's moving up, the water is evaporating. There's a pull of evaporation on that water as well. And again, the tendency of two kinds of molecules to stick together, that's called adhesion. We also see adhesion on our windshield. So if you think about when you're driving in the rain, when the water beads up on the windshield. Now, I'm not talking about after you put Rain-X on it. I'm talking about just a standard windshield with water. You will see water, even without the Rain-X, will bead up on the windshield. And that is because of adhesion. All right? Surface tension. Surface tension is super cool because there's a lot that can be said about surface tension. If you've ever, small organisms like that don't weigh very much can really take advantage of surface tension. And surface tension is how difficult it is to break the surface of a liquid. So for surface tension, if you've ever seen little bugs that walk on water, they're able to walk on water because of surface tension. Their body weight is not strong enough to break the water molecules apart. Now, I'm going to leave this for just a second, and I want to show you a really good video. We're going to watch that water transpiration as well, but I'm going to go to YouTube for just a second. And there's a really good video, and hopefully it comes up and I don't have to spend a lot of time. There's a little old man in a lab coat. Not Bill Nye here, but he's awesome as well. Here he is. So it's only a minute long, but this is really good video, so I'm going to make it big.
A demonstration, perhaps, that you've already seen is when a glass is completely filled with water. Then a cardboard is placed over the glass. It's inverted. And then the hand supporting the cardboard is removed. Atmospheric pressure causes the card to stay in place. This demonstration can actually mislead you regarding the understanding of the next demonstration. Let's add a little food coloring to this water so that it's more visible. Now let's pour that water into a mason jar with a wire screen lid in place of the normal cap. So the water enters the jar. Once again, we'll fill it to overflowing. We'll place a card on the screen and turn it upside down. But this time, instead of removing my hand, we'll remove the card. The question is, why doesn't the water come out through the screen? Surface tension is the answer to that question. The surface tension of the water around the small holes in the screen. If we tip the jar just slightly, we're able to cause the water to come out through the screen.
All right, so I hope you guys thought that was interesting. Now, if you didn't get anything from that, maybe you got a good, magic trick you can show your friends. But I think it's a really nice video to cover surface tension. And again, all right, so we looked at the little bug. Here he is. We looked at the little bug. This is modeling surface tension. I do want to show you a quick video on water transport. So this is really quick. We only talk about this a little bit in this class. We do expand on it more if you decide to take Bio 102.
How does water get from the roots of a tree to its leaves? The evaporation of water from leaves moves water molecules up from the roots. The evaporation exerts a pull that is relayed downward along a string of water molecules from leaf to root. Hydrogen bonds cause water molecules to stick together, a phenomenon called cohesion. As each water molecule evaporates, it pulls on the next water molecule, and it pulls on the next. This relays the pull of evaporating water molecules all the way down to the roots. The cohesion of water helps to keep gravity from pulling the water molecules back down.
All right, so that's all we're gonna discuss as far as water transport. So just know that cohesion and evaporation, of course, play a big role here. And the next thing we're gonna look at is water and temperature. If you've known, there's a couple things to just think about when you think about water. If you've ever tried to, let's say, cook pasta or whatever you're trying to do, you can put a big pot of water on the stove, and it's going to take quite a bit of time for that water to become a rapid boil. At the end, what you have to do in order to get that water rapidly boiling is you have to break those hydrogen bonds. That takes a lot of energy. So there's a lot of energy in those hydrogen bonds in water. So thermal energy is the energy associated with the random movement of atoms and molecules. So thermal energy in transfer from a warmer to cooler body of matter is defined as heat. So you're going from warmer to cooler. So warmer to cooler, that's heat. Temperature is basically measuring the intensity of heat. So all right, so we're looking at heat must be absorbed to break hydrogen bonds. So that's why, again, water has a really high boiling point, meaning it takes a lot of work to break those hydrogen bonds. Heat is released when hydrogen bonds form. To raise the temperature of water, hydrogen bonds between water molecules must be broken before the molecule can move faster. Thus, when warming up, water absorbs a large amount of heat, and when it cools, water molecules slow down, more hydrogen bonds form, and heat is released. So if you think about water, freezing water, if you freeze water, if you've noticed, let's say you wanted to freeze a bottle of water. If you want to freeze a bottle of water properly, you need to open up the bottle of water and pour a little bit out. Depending on your bottle, sometimes they don't fill them up completely and you'll be fine. But if it's really filled to the top, you need to make sure you pour a little bit out, and then you can put your bottle in the refrigerator. Because what happens, those hydrogen bonds will stiffen out whenever you put it in the refrigerator, and it will cause the water to expand. So your bottle, if it's not full, if it's full, it'll expand out your bottle. That's why they say don't put cans in the freezer, because if you know you put a can in the freezer, you may have done this, the can can pop. So I've had this happen to people that I know. So obviously Earth has a giant water supply, and that helps to maintain the temperatures. Helps keep temperatures that, I guess, help support the life. So you want to keep, if animals are used to a cold water climate, they don't need a drastic change in water temperature. So, polar bear, we all know, we've seen on the news where polar bears are losing their the ice and so forth and so on. So you want to make sure that you're keeping water at a temperature for that particular environment's life. So if it's a cold environment, we want to keep the water cold. If it's a warmer environment, keep the water warm. Water resists to temperature change. Also, it stabilizes ocean temperatures, creates a favorable environment for marine life. When a substance evaporates, the surface of the liquid that remains behind cools down. This is a process called evaporative cooling. This cooling occurs because the molecules with greatest energy leave the surface. And the best example is if you've ever watched the end of a football game. Football is always in the cold seasons, and you'll see these football players with all this heat coming off. And this is trying to cool this guy's sweating, and it's freezing outside. Normally you don't see this unless it's cold. If it's warm outside, you're not going to see smoke coming off of, or it's not really smoke, but the steam coming off. But this is evaporative cooling. He's evaporating. It's an attempt to cool off his body, to evaporate that sweat. Water can exist as gas, liquid, or solid. And here's the big thing. Water is less dense. Now, this is really, really big deal. So I'm going to get my pen out here. Water is less dense as a solid than as a liquid because of hydrogen bonds. All right? So think about a lake. This is my lake. It's beautiful. All right. If we think about freezing weather, okay, we think about this lake freezing. We all know that ice forms at the top of this, right? So we get a nice thick layer of ice. Here's my ice. We know ice floats. That's because water is less dense as a solid than as a liquid. If this ice did not float, we would have serious problems. There'd be no fish in places where the water's freezing. We have fish here, right? Here's our little fish. If this wasn't true, this whole thing would ice up and they would all die. So we need ice to float. We need water to be less dense as a solid. When water freezes, each molecule forms a stable hydrogen bond with its neighbors. So it's almost like just kind of stiffening out. Ice crystals form. The molecules are less densely packed than in liquid water. Because ice is less dense, water floats. The ice floats. And here is showing liquid water and then the ice. So all of this ice is allowing this polar bear to have a nice little habitat. So going back to what I was mentioning earlier, if this ice melts because of temperature change, this poor guy doesn't have a place to live. This is where he lives. So this has been a really big deal. If you want to know more, you can Google it. All right, so what is a solution? A solution is a liquid consisting of uniform mixture of two or more substances. And we have all made some sort of solution in our life. I like tea, iced tea. You can make sweet tea if you want, like the McDonald's sweet tea. In this particular situation, let's do Mickey D's sweet tea. If we think about it. So, oh, I lost my. It keeps going back. Stop. Sorry. Here we go. Maybe third time's a charm. Here we go. McDonald's sweet tea. Let's think about that for a second. Our solute is going to be sugar. It's what is being dissolved. All right. Our solvent is the water. Now, grant you with the tea in it. All right, so this is going to be, and this is an aqueous solution because it's going to be, anytime you have a solution that's got water as the solvent is what's is the dissolving agent. The solute is what's being dissolved. So if you think of salt water, salt would be the solute, the solvent again would be water. Again, water is the universal solvent, most things. The saying here, like dissolves like. Water is polar. And will dissolves other polar molecules without problem. So, for instance, you know that table salt, remember table salt, we talked about that, sodium and then chlorine. This is polar because chlorine's going to hog, it forms these charges here. This is a polar molecule. All right? So, a polar molecule will dissolve easily in another polar molecule. So we don't have any trouble. If you want to dissolve salt in water, you don't have to do any work. You pour the salt in and then you're done. It dissolves. However, if you've ever tried to dissolve sugar in room temperature water, it's not going to happen unless you put a lot of elbow into mixing it up. Okay? So here's showing you, and we're going to go into that in just a second. So here's the salt water. And this is what happens. The water molecules are able to surround around the chlorine ion and then around the sodium ion. Notice that this is these are the hydrogen atoms right here. And remember, they're positively charged. And this is that oxygen atom right here. Oxygen is negatively charged. These guys attract, and these guys attract. And that's what causes salt to dissolve in water. Now, let me come back to this slide for just a second. We know, you know, I'm sure you know, that we can't dissolve. Oil does not dissolve in water. Is oil polar or nonpolar? By knowing that information. We know that oil is nonpolar because water is polar. Like dissolves like. Polar things will dissolve in other polar things. So if you have something that's nonpolar, you could dissolve oil in it. So that's something to kind of think about. Sugar tends to be more nonpolar. Sugar is nonpolar. I had a situation recently where I went to Dunkin' Donuts and I ordered an iced coffee. And I had them add sugar to it. Well, the lady gave me a cup of the iced coffee, but there was no sugar in it, and then she hands me sugar packets. The problem with this is, you give me these sugar packets with this iced coffee. Do you really think my sugar is going to dissolve? It's not. I would have to mix it and mix it and mix it. And think about it, when you're mixing in sugar and water, or the cold water, you have to mix and mix and mix. By you mixing it and stirring it, you're adding in friction. And that friction is what's dissolving the salt, what's dissolving the sugar, but you're having to do a lot of work. Needless to say, I don't even think I drank that coffee because it was disgusting. So I never got my sugar to dissolve. All right. So the chemistry of life is sensitive to acidic and basic conditions. Now, this is important when we start talking about pH, and we were supposed to do a pH lab tonight in lab, but we're not going to get to that. But I do want to make sure you look at in liquids, hydrogen ions are H+, and hydroxide ions are OH-. Both types are very reactive. Substances that donate hydrogen atoms are called acids, and a base is a substance that reduces the hydrogen ion concentration of a solution. And just to kind of give you an idea, just to simplify what this is saying, something that looks like this, like HCl, HF, there's so many, we'll just leave it at these. These are two examples of acids. Just to kind of give you an example of a base, the best one is sodium hydroxide. You're looking for that OH here. The pH scale describes how acidic or basic a solution is. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14, where 0 is the most acidic and 14 is the most basic. Each pH unit represents a 10-fold change in the concentration of hydrogen. So here, at the lower end, there's lots of H+. At the upper end of the scale, when it says basic, little H+. And we're going to look at that more. All right, a buffer is a substance that minimizes changes in pH. A buffer accepts hydrogen when it's in excess and donates hydrogen when it's depleted. Water is a fabulous buffer. Remember, we talked about that before. It's a great buffer. Now, here's a pH scale. And the pH scale here goes from 0 to 14. And just to kind of give you some ideas, this battery acid is less than 1, so that's really, really, really acidic. Gastric juices and lemon juices are very acidic. They're about 2. Vinegar is also acidic, and cola. I watched a woman yesterday at Target, and she was buying lots and lots. I think she had maybe 8 or 9 cases of soda, and she bought antacids. And I kept thinking to myself, I bet you're needing that antacid because you're drinking so much cola. Antacid, you're putting all that acidic drink into your stomach, and so that could definitely cause acid reflux. So think about the acidity, lots and lots and lots of acid. Tomato juice or tomatoes in general are really, really, really acidic. So if you find yourself consuming lots of tomato juice, that's also very acidic. Rainwater, slightly less acidic. Human urine and saliva are about 6. Pure water is about 7. That's neutral. Human blood is supposed to be neutral, and so is tears. So about 7 degrees. Seawater, it's going to be a pH of about 8, which is basic. Seawater's got lots of salt in it and probably some urine and who else knows what's out there in the seawater. Milk of magnesia, that is going to be a little bit above 10. So think about, a lot of people drink milk of magnesia when they've had a lot of acid in it. So if you have the acid and you mix with the base, you kind of get some neutral here. Household bleach, very, very, very basic. Household ammonia, but also very basic. Oven cleaner, very, very basic. So take a look at what they have in these beakers over here. In acidic solution, you have lots of H+, but very little OH. In a neutral solution, you have equal amounts of OH and positive H. Okay? In a basic solution, just a couple of H+, but lots of OH. All right? And it's the same thing again. And so what this, the last little section here is talking about carbon dioxide is the main product of fossil fuel combustion. Increasing this, we're basically increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and this is linked to global climate change. So carbon dioxide, we breathe carbon dioxide. So the more populated we become, the more carbon dioxide we're going to be producing. So that is a potential problem. That carbon dioxide has to go somewhere. That we're cutting down trees. The trees are the ones that are supposed to be processing this carbon dioxide, but there's not as many trees. So that's a potential issue as well. So about 25% of human-generated carbon dioxide is absorbed by the oceans. So that's still 25%, that's still leaving 75% out in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide dissolves in seawater and it lowers the pH of the ocean. This is known as ocean acidification. So when you lower the pH here, you're causing the pH of the ocean to become more acidic. That's a problem. Okay, we don't want the ocean to become more acidic because then that hurts the marine environment in those particular situations. So again, that's causing some issues. As the seawater becomes more acidic, those extra hydrogen ions combine with carbonate ions, this guy here, to form a bicarbonate ion. So this is a bicarbonate ion. So when you combine these two together, you get this. This reaction reduces carbonate ion concentrations available to corals and other shell-building animals. So what this means is, let me get my pen. Okay. This carbonate ion is naturally in the ocean water. It is not meant to be there to basically make bicarbonate ions. It is meant to be there for these coral animals and other animals with shells to build their exoskeleton. Okay? So this guy here, this component here, is important in the coral environments to build their shell. All right? The problem is it's not there. They're not going to have an abundance of this carbonate ion because the carbonate ion is being used here to offset the extra carbon dioxide that we have in the water. So it becomes limited. and that's a problem. So this is just talking about an experiment, and it says in a controlled experiment, scientists look at the effects of decreased carbonate ion. So what happens, the carbonate ion is being used to offset the extra CO2. So when you decrease the amount of carbonate ion available to these reef organisms, they're going to measure to see the rate of calcium that's there, essentially. So the lower the concentration of carbonate ions, the lower the rate of calcification. Calcification, think about calcification of your bones. Calcification is important in these reef organisms to make their exoskeleton, and thus the slower growth in coral animals. By increasing the carbon dioxide, you're decreasing the amount of carbonate ions available for these animals to go through calcification. The results of the experiment and observational field studies of sites where pH naturally varies have implications on health of coral reef and other diverse organisms they support. So by increasing carbon dioxide, you're going to decrease the amount of carbonate ion to animals, because the carbonate ion is going to be used to offset this increase in CO2. So that's the gist of this. And that's what this graph is showing. As you increase carbon dioxide, here's the calcification rate here. So calcification rate, and this is the amount. So you need, in order for calcification to take place, you need lots of the carbonate ion here. And this is just showing raising CO2 bubbles. Again, this is going to lower the pH of that water. All right, so again, the emergent properties, and we talked about emergent properties last class, of water support life on Earth. So that's why they say, you know, there's all this talk about, is there life on Mars? Well, by looking at other planets haven't shown any presence of water. Now, if there's water, there has to be some sort of life based on what we know. Everywhere, water is essential for life. So if there's water on Mars, the astronauts basically found evidence that water was once abundant on Mars. So there had to be life there, because life is so important to water, and vice versa. So when you're looking for distant planets that could possibly have life, the first thing we want to look for is there water? And this last little section here just goes through fundamental things that you need to know for this particular chapter. Now, I'm done with chemistry at this point. We won't talk about chemistry anymore. If you have questions, please make sure you ask those questions, either write them down now and you can ask them at the beginning of next class, or you're welcome to, you can ask them in the comment section below. So that's it. Now, I do want to say one more thing. This video was really long, and because I'm at home and you're at home, I felt like I was able to just do a little bit more with the chemistry than, say, if I were in the classroom and had to rush through it. So we will start chapter 3 on Wednesday. Your chemistry homework is still due on Wednesday evening, so